Wow. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. And the American Civil Liberties Union just filing a lawsuit against the Obama administration over the government's massive phone records grab, challenging a program that it states, and I quote here, vacuums up information about every phone call placed within, from, or to the United States, going on to say that it violates the First Amendment rights of free speech and the right of privacy protected by the Fourth Amendment in the Constitution itself. To the ACLU's Alexander Abdo with this just breaking news. Why did you do this?
Neil, thanks for having me. The government should be able to surveil people when it has reason to do so, but it shouldn't be indiscriminately sweeping up the communications of millions of innocent Americans. We learned last week of a sweeping program of surveillance. The ACLU is a customer of Verizon Business and has been targeted under this law, and it's simply unconstitutional and un-American.
All right, when the ACLU went after President Bush for wiretapping, and by extension the same argument holds on this administration for snooping, that argument being what?
Well, the government's argument for snooping has always been that it sometimes has a reason to suspect people of wrongdoing. The problem is when the government goes beyond that reason, when it tries to amass as much information as possible. We've now grown the biggest haystack in the history of the intelligence community's work, but there's no proof that we're any closer to finding the needle.
Do you get a sense, though, that this argument, and you're right, through Republican and Democratic administrations, it is a familiar one, maybe for all I know a justifiable one, that we have your interest at heart when we start rifling through records, that this is for your good and keeping you alive? The ACLU then appears to be saying, here's where we draw the line when it gets so big and indiscriminate?
That's exactly right. The Constitution imposes real limits on the government. The Constitution allows the government to pursue terrorists, to pursue those who break the law, but it doesn't allow the government to sweep up everyone's communications in the way it has been doing. And for 200 years, our government has been able to keep us safe, staying true to those values. There's no reason we need to sacrifice those values now.
You know, Alexander, what makes this kind of unique in terms of your group now is that, by and large, it was largely in agreement with then Senator Barack Obama's stance against potential abuses of the Patriot Act, and that it could lead to abuses of freedom and personal liberties. And for whatever promised good, it would do a lot of bad. I'm very much trivializing it, and I apologize for that. But what do you think of just the odd flip of events now that has you targeting now President Obama and the practices his administration has taken?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and a hard question, and I think the explanation is that power can be seductive, and especially in the era of big data, where it's increasingly easy for the government to aggregate all sorts of information about Americans. It's seductive for the intelligence communities to do precisely what the NSA is doing, which is to gather as much as possible, to collect it all now and ask questions later. And so it's understandable that the government is trying to do this, but it's simply not constitutional.
So, Alexander, let me ask you one final question. Apparently the germ for this sweeping NSA action, collecting over 115 million Verizon phone records, was post the Boston terror incident, I believe middle of April, and that they then got a court order, were told a court order, to have Verizon hand over those records just to make sure, as they tried to cross-reference databases and names, that this was not part of a larger plot, or to find indications of a potential larger plot, so that they argue the greater good was involved here. You say that it got too sweeping, too large, and no good came of that, hence this suit.
Well, the best reports now are that the order that we saw last week has absolutely nothing to do with the Boston bombing. The government has apparently been getting these orders for the last 7 years.
Yeah, but I believe it got so big post-Boston, but you're quite right, this was a common request, but that it got very big using that as the motive. You don't buy that? Your group doesn't buy that?
Well, I think the broader point, whether or not that's true, is that the government has plenty of tools at its disposal if it wants to target a particular number. If, for example, they had the numbers of the two brothers who were accused of the Boston bombing, they can pretty easily search their records for those numbers. They can search the records of telephone companies to see whether they're connected with other potential terrorist plots. But what they don't need to accomplish that end is access, for example, to the ACLU's records, to the records of Fox News, to the records of the countless viewers at home who are innocent of any wrongdoing. Their records just aren't relevant to terrorist investigations.
Alexander, thank you very, very much. We appreciate your coming here.